to continue your membership in IRSlice, to continue your participation in the association, and we hope to see many of you at our November annual research conference in Boston, November 16th through the 18th, later in the fall. So I would like to explain to you that this webinar series, which again we launched last spring and are continuing this fall, is really built around our reaffirmation statement. So for those of you that may not have had a chance, I encourage you to go to our website for IRSlice, not now, after the webinar, and I encourage you to look up our reaffirmation statement and see the guiding principles and the major initiatives that the association is working on. And in doing so, you'll see a common theme of advancing research around service learning and community engagement. And that's one of the reasons we're having this Advancing Research webinar series, is really to provide a space through technology to engage various members in conversations around research and dialogue around research and scholarship focused on service learning and community engagement. So for today's presentation, our featured speakers are Julie Hatcher and Tom Hahn from the IUPUI Center for Service and Learning. And I'm going to pass it over to Julie and Tom. Thank you so much again for being here, and thanks for being our presenters today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Julie Hatcher, and I'm the Executive Director here at our Center for Service and Learning, and I'm an Associate Professor in Philanthropic Studies. We're very pleased that you're here this afternoon. We know your time is quite valuable, and we hope that this generates some new thinking and helps to move your work forward on your own campus.
And I'm Tom Hahn. I'm a Research and Evaluation Specialist here at CSL. And I also serve on a variety of campus-wide assessment committees.
And I want to thank Tom for all of his work with Tara to make this possible in terms of all the logistics. And one thing that Tara has done is send out to you a copy, a Word document that we invite you to open. And then the one thing I'll draw your attention to on that document is the very first word you may see is the word draft. And the next slide will be fine, Tara. Thank you. When we were we had been in touch with IRSlice saying that we'd be quite willing to do a webinar, and then when we explored ideas, they asked us first, well, what's the new thing going on? And this is actually the newest work that we've been focused on, is work around a service learning taxonomy. We are saying draft because that is what it is, and you are in some ways a large, very large focus group, so we look forward to your feedback. These will be the goals of the seminar, or the webinar, and explaining what the taxonomy is, giving you a background of our campus, also placing that in sort of the tradition of our Center for Service and Learning to emphasize research and scholarship. Our goal here is to use this taxonomy to identify variables that can improve research, but quite often it's very clear that this taxonomy has multiple opportunities to support faculty in their design of service learning classes. And then at the end, we'll give you information on how you can give us feedback. So first of all, next slide, please. You will see, here we are. If you were in the very middle of this picture, that's where Tom and I are sitting right now. This is our campus at IUPUI. Large urban serving university, 18 schools, including professional schools, medicine, dentistry, public health, and a strong emphasis on if you can go back, a strong emphasis on undergraduate education. We're very pleased to have been recognized recently by U.S. News and World Report, not only for our excellence in service learning and themed learning communities, but also a new category on campus commitment to undergraduate education. And for those of you who are familiar with our work over time, our community partners you'd see on the just near west of campus across the river, and then also beyond the city, the cityscape, you would see the near east side, which is a newly designated promise zone for Indianapolis. And so much of our service learning happens right in this central part of the city. Next. And so as we proceed through this, we want to give you a background as to why were we interested in developing a taxonomy. The primary reason really is around institutional assessment, and that institutional assessment and institutional research on high impact practices. Our campus, like yours, I'm quite sure, is paying far more attention to high impact teaching strategies. And the good news is there's a lot more attention being given. The underside of that is there's heightened accountability around service learning as a high impact practice. And so this heightened accountability has asked that across our programs, a taxonomy would be developed for each one of the types of high impact practices. And so Tom and I have been working the last, I'd say, 2.5 months on this task.
Right.
Now,
I would just add that the timing of the webinar was really good because it really gave us a timeline to have a really solid draft. So thank you, Tara, for that.
Nothing like a deadline.
That's right.
The other project that Tom and I are working on is a book that we'll describe in just a minute. But we sort of from the beginning decided to embrace this institutional request around assessment to help our work in research. And so part of our enthusiasm for this is that it can help us specifically, but hopefully you in the field, in order to identify variables. And we'll go into a little bit more of that, but a variable is simply a dimension of the course designed that may vary from low to high. And particularly how these variables may relate to student outcomes and specifically civic outcomes is what we're currently most interested in. And so while we are have been spurred on by the campus to do this, we see this as advancing research as well. Next slide. And so one of the disclaimers I want to make from the beginning, this is not the Tom and Julie show on this. This has been, now, you can send your critiques to us because we're the final editors, and so anything that you want to give us feedback on, we will take, but we really have hammered this out quite a bit. That's a phrase that Bob Bringle and I used to always use if we were trying to get down to something, is hammering it out. And the other thing I'd say is we've done a lot of dialogue across difference. As we all know, there are lots of multiple perspectives on service learning and its purposes and how it best comes about. And so we've had a lot of conversation internally with Mary Price and Morgan Studer, who are our staff who work directly with faculty. And then also Patty Clayton, who's a senior scholar, has given us a lot of feedback on this. But your feedback, again, will continue to help this project. One of the things that we want to draw your attention to as well is the literature review in the back of the
taxonomy. It's on the last page of the taxonomy. It's all the literature we use to develop this.
And particularly the recent publication by Barbara Jacoby, we found that to be very, very helpful. Tania Mitchell and the work of many others. So what Tom has done an outstanding job of just continuing to go back to the research and find out what, based on that, how can that influence these rows of the taxonomy. So the next slide will be describing what is called on our campus as the RISE initiative. The RISE initiative is focused on undergraduate education. And really the impetus for this work has resulted from the Rise to the IUPUI Challenge initiative. Now this initiative primarily began as what I'd say as a marketing strategy in order to define what undergraduate education looks like at IUPUI. And so it it brands the IUPUI degrees in a particular way. And what our campus is most interested in is how is it that RISE experiences contribute to retention and academic success. But also our campus is very interested in this from an equity perspective in terms of understanding how these deep learning experiences are available to all students and not just some students. And so the next slide describes what this RISE initiative stands for. And so RISE, you'll see, is an acronym for Research, International, Service Learning, and Experiential Learning. Now, I know other campuses have taken a similar kind of approach, reading most recently about University of Northern Illinois' campus, and we can hear other examples of how you might be clustering these high-impact practices and naming them under a particular umbrella. So ours is service learning, and our Center for Service and Learning then has been responsible for tracking now service learning courses. That has a lot of implications. Promoting service learning course design. We consider this not just at the undergraduate level, but also the graduates, as our campus, we showed you initially, has a lot of interest of service learning at the graduate level. We also have bumped up on our campus, as probably you as well, that there are lots and lots of HIPs out there that are also valued. And so this RISE initiative has sort of been contested currently under, is that the best acronym? It doesn't include co-curricular, and there's interest now in extending RISE to a co-curricular setting as well. But the key value, I'd say, is that this RISE initiative has put additional pressure, accountability on us to count service learning courses. And our colleague, and that's tied us very closely to the registrar. The registrar is a key player in all of this work. And then our colleague Mary Price and Kristen Norris have created a mechanism to actually count, track, and get lots of information about service learning courses. And this has the residual effect of giving us all the data necessary for something like the Carnegie classification. So the next slide is simply one of the many kinds of lists that constitute high-impact practices. And I think for those of us who have been service learning educators across the years, we could go through and do a pretty large check mark behind each of these elements of a high-impact practice and how they relate to service learning.
And Julie, I would add to this list too a presentation I just saw a couple of days ago by Judy Mattello at Cal State. Two other line items could be nurtured and valued, which I hadn't seen those linked with high-impact practices before, but I think they're definitely appropriate there.
Particularly when the concept of nurtured and valued, particularly when we know that civic engagement has a lot in terms of how a student has a sense of who they are and their identity. Those are key elements. So the next slide is again just an illustration of various kinds of high impact practices at a meeting yesterday. The phrase project-based learning isn't on our diagram and could fit under what we have around capstone courses and projects. But I just think that as we know more about student learning and excellence in undergraduate education, we're going to continue to have examples of high impact practices. Generally speaking, we know that this leads to persistence and GPAs, deeper approaches to learning, and higher levels of student engagement, as well as greater appreciation for diversity. So as we proceed through, one of our key challenges on our campus is the fidelity of high impact practices. And fidelity has to do with the exactness. When we're talking about the it, oftentimes in research we come back to, well, what is the it that you are exploring? And the clearer definition you can provide of the it, and the clearer that those elements are, the more likely it's going to be for someone else to understand the research that you have undertaken. Now, in terms of program and program evaluation, that program fidelity assessment, as it says, offers another level of detail about the program as implemented by examining the degree to which the interventions are implemented as theoretically planned. So we can go through and identify these examples of what a high fidelity service learning class would be, or poor fidelity examples, such as a service learning course that had no structured reflection. So this conversation that's come out of our assessment folks on campus is very much interested in what is the fidelity of service learning classes. The next slide gives you what our definition is of service learning. Now, this is a long-standing definition, but you will also see on the back of your page in the resource section that we've modified it a couple of different times. So this is simply what we're working with today. It's what has guided our research on service learning throughout. So we're talking about a course-based service, organized service activity, reflect and specifically reflect in such a way to not only understand course content, but a broader appreciation of the discipline and personal values and civic responsibility. The next slide shows you that we have a series at IUPUI called this IUPUI series, novel title, on service learning research. And so we currently have 3 volumes in that series, and we are working now on volume 3. And that book 3, as we call it, is research on student civic outcomes. And many of the authors who are contributing to that chapter, to the chapter in that forthcoming volume, have been very helpful to our thinking on this taxonomy. And we again are looking forward to including this in the introduction of the taxonomy, in the introduction of book 3, as a way to help point out to readers this is exactly what's happening. The next slide is a critique of some critiques of service learning research. And in fact, a very important critique, I think, came by Dwight and Janet of book 2. What they noticed in book 2, although we'd spent a great deal of time providing lots of different examples of research and assessment strategies in book 2, what we didn't do, according to their review, is to give a very clear definition of all the various components in service learning. So we gave the definition, but not all the variables that could come to bear. And so we know that this taxonomy will assist us in being more specific about the kinds of variables that are comprised of service learning class, and how those variables then come to bear on, in our case for this next book, variations in civic learning. And that Ashley Finley's research has been so very beneficial, but she too just identifies that although we can say service learning leads to X, Y, and Z, really what we need to be doing right now is understanding what dimension of service learning and to what extent that dimension of service learning leads to X, Y, and Z. And so we're quite hopeful that this work on the taxonomy helps all of us to isolate additional variables.
I would just add there, Julie, that in the Giles and Eiler quote, they went on to say after that oftentimes the independent variable in research is submitted for publication is just participation in service learning, and nothing is further explored with that. And I'm guilty of that as well. So I think that is in the fall 2013 issue of the Michigan Journal, and it's a great read. It's really helpful. I'd recommend that to all of you to check that out.
And so we do know through research, next slide, and there's some consistent research that's, I'll say, elevating the importance or the special qualities of service learning as a high impact practice. We had the opportunity to host Ashley Finley at our Assessment Institute in 2011, and she is giving significant evidence of the unique qualities of service learning as a high impact practice. And I know when this information came out, I was quick to share this with deans and others on our campus, because I think this kind of research at the most macro national level, also that's coming out of Perry as well, is indicating that of the high impact practices, service learning has a special quality. What I think right now is our challenge as service learning researchers is to keep pressing this additional value, because sometimes I think as a high impact practice, service learning can be lumped together with all others as if they're all equal. And I think that there are dimensions of service learning that are quite different. The next slide talks a bit about this, and it's simply entitled Service Learning to What End? A number of years ago, we asked ourselves in our Center for Service and Learning, we were doing lots of different programs, lots of different initiatives, and the question became to why are we doing all of this work? And that long question led to our thinking through, and Rick Battistoni was highly influential in this, our construct of civic-minded graduate, and then my work is around civic-minded professional. But if service learning, we need to have a clear knowing of to what end it is trying to reach. Now, we know that service learning is only one of many strategies that can develop civic competencies. But by all means, I think having this civic dimension of service learning is the unique aspect of this pedagogy that often can get neutralized. I'll say in this current environment that we're in, where service learning, how does it contribute to workforce development? How does it contribute to critical thinking? How does it contribute to X, Y, and Z? And I think we have the aspiration to continually hold up its civic value in terms of preparing students. So we will go through a little next slide, the process of developing the taxonomy. And I'm going to have Tom to talk about this.
Ken O'Donnell was our keynote speaker at the last year's Assessment Institute, and he gave an excellent talk on that. And he spoke a lot about Cal State's development of their taxonomies for their high impact practices. So that really pushed our work forward, how they track the HIPS and civic engagement. So that, following that, then we were tasked work we were going to do with, from Kathy Johnson, our EDC, to develop this taxonomy. So we dug deep into the literature, as you can see at the end of the taxonomy, and we met and deliberated a lot with our CSL colleagues and senior scholars. And two terms that I became very familiar with this summer were converge and diverge. And we're get a lot of emphasis to we can diverge, but at some point we really have to converge to really get at what we want to share with people. So I think what you're going to see today is a real convergence on that. And then again, it goes back to this rewriting, adding domains, and really condensing. And so we're presenting it to you now, and we really welcome your feedback on it. It's very, very helpful to us. Next slide.
So you'll see on this slide the 6 different, what do we call it? Categories, domains?
Categories are attributes.
Attributes.
Yeah.
Yep, we've settled on the word attributes. Yeah. Thank you. These are the 6 service learning attributes. Now, you might say, why 6? Why not more? Why not less? We do know from AAC&U, in terms of all their work with the rubrics, that any more than 6 becomes too cumbersome. And so we tried to really keep it at 5, and then we went to 6. So this is where we are as far as the 6 attributes. The next slide, though, is a very important one because we're calling this the gray matter. We know that there's lots of things that influence service learning course attributes. More and more research is talking about campus mission and campus culture. The way a faculty member thinks about teaching itself, their philosophical perspective that they bring. The one on the far right is an important one to point out, I think, the duration of the community project. We do know that from research that Sherry Billig and Mabry a number of years ago, that the amount of service matters, but we chose not to include that. This was at the advice of both Mary and Morgan, who work directly with faculty, and generally speaking, faculty have very different purposes for the length of time, and so we're resting on the side that it's what a faculty member does with the experience itself, not the amount of time. So these are choice points that you make as you're trying to refine what are the key attributes of a service learning course. So the next slide is just a basic slide about identifying variables. I'm not going to go into each of these bullet points at all. But the main point I want to say is that the enthusiasm that I have around this is that it's going to help identify variables and going to help others figure out what is it that I can do if I want to compare my course to Fred's course who doesn't have service learning, or if I want to compare my course this semester to my students next semester. If I want to make slight modifications, how do I make those modifications in the variables? And so and we'll go through some examples of how we think that this can lead to identifying variables. So the next slide is I want to reiterate that IUPUI is adapting the approach at Cal State. And so we've been asked throughout, why did you choose low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity? That is what Cal State has done in their taxonomy development. And you can see through their website the taxonomies that they've already worked on. Ken O'Donnell and his colleagues they've already developed taxonomies on learning communities, summer bridge, undergrad research, first year experience, and many others. They have yet to do one in service learning, and our hope is to, after this, if we do other revisions, to share this and work directly with others in the Cal State system around feedback on the taxonomy. So the very first area then is reciprocal partnerships, the next slide. And what I found quite interesting in doing all this work is really, I've been in the field for a long time, and I think the medium intensity is about where we were around 15 years ago. Anything you see in that medium, I tend to call the low intensity columns all the way down sort of like a project-based approach. The medium intensity is what I sort of call like a low-level service learning or first phase service learning. And then the high intensity is what I think the entire literature around democratic, engaged campuses, social justice, critical reflection, that entire literature has helped to shape what I'd say are the descriptors in that high intensity column. And so when we're thinking about, for our current research book, to what extent do these variables in service learning contribute to students' civic growth, I think we'll be looking at that most high intensity row in order to pull out particular variables there. And so like for this one, the reciprocal partnerships and processes that shape the community project. If you go to that far right column, you could begin pulling out examples of variables, such as the interactions, number of interactions that you have with a community partner, the role of the community partner as a co-facilitator, what's the length of time of the partnership, did the partner access additional campus resources as a result of hosting. Let me also make one clarification I haven't mentioned. We kept running into this challenge with writing this taxonomy from a student perspective, from a community member's perspective, and so what we ended up doing, and our campus appreciates this, we're saying that there is a title at the top of it that says instructor-centric.
Right.
So it's instructor-centric for course design. And so that's why all of these start off with the instructor does X. And that's how we got to that point. So that's reciprocal partnership. You'll see the next one is community project. And so the kind of variables that might come out in this, the instructor integrates the community project and relevant social issues as critical dimensions for student understanding of academic content and ability to complete assignments. The syllabus provides a strong rationale for the relationship of the community project to learning outcomes. And again, this would have, for example, been informed by the recent research of Stephanie Stuckmer. Thank you. But you can see how there would be very different variables, and Portland State years ago recommended reviewing the syllabus. This just restates the importance of taking that approach as a type of variable in service learning course design. And we could simply ask instructors, did you assign any readings on social issues? That would be a kind of variable that might change from instructor to instructor that's likely to influence the civic outcomes of students. The next one is what we're calling, after community project, is diversity of interactions. And what I'd say is dialogue across difference. As we had the opportunity to work with a team on research on the Bonner Scholars Program, one of the key variables, or it actually was the key variable to contributing to a student's understanding of themselves as a civic-minded professional, in that case, that was the question, was the variable of dialogue across difference. And we see this repeated across research, that the more we can have students interact with both community partners, community members, peers, around a range of experiences and a range of perspectives, that's going to lead to more of the civic competencies that we're interested in developing. So the next one, if we titled it currently Civic Competencies, we face this challenge in our current book. Should this be civic learning? Should it be civic competencies? And we've chosen the more broad term right now on civic competencies. And this is the way that the instructor focuses on the integration of discipline-based content with civic learning and civic competencies, and emphasizes the relevance of the community project to the public purposes of the discipline in society. And so this is part of, in our original definition of service learning, it's this one phrase that the students should reflect on the service in such a way as to understand the discipline. This is what this has always meant to us, that through a service learning course, someone should understand the public purposes of being a journalist. Someone should understand the public purposes of accounting, or the public purposes of history, or Spanish. And so this is what we're trying to get at there in terms of is this an emphasis of the course, so that we might ask faculty, did you include a reading on the public purposes of your discipline in this course? That would be a very easy way to get at that particular variable. Critical reflection, and we just got a couple more here. Critical reflection, so much has been written about critical reflection that if anything it was hard to condense this because there's just so much out there in terms of what we know matters.
Right.
One of the things that we did in our Campus Compact, Indiana Campus Compact study a number of years ago was literally to ask people the amount of reflection that they did. We know that the amount matters. We know that both informal and structured matters. But there's so many variables that could be pulled out here in the critical reflection that contribute to civic outcomes. And then lastly, thanks to Patty Clayton for reminding us of this, and then we add this as our last row, and then Tom went back to how is this addressed in the Cal State taxonomies, and we've added a row on assessment. And so this, again, is including the community partner in the assessment. And then also, most importantly, it's not just assessment of student learning, but it's metrics for organizational capacity and community outcomes that can be measured. And so the work of Littlepage and Bennett and Beth Daisley on community outcomes was very helpful for us in thinking about that.
I'll just add there that we initially tried to do assessment across the rows to save having that sixth row, but it became problematic to do that. And then Patty Clayton said we really had to get at community impact, so that was working to the high intensity column on that. So I think it really enhances it to have just its own separate row for assessment.
Yeah. And so, last couple of things that we'll mention before we take some questions from you. We can imagine that this will be very helpful as a resource or a tool in faculty consultations. We think this can help to, I'll say, isolate some workshop topics, like if we're saying that this is really the dimensions of high quality service learning, then we should be able to provide topics and workshops and resources around these particular variables. And then again, in our own campus context, because of departments use that tag, we want to increase the departmental understanding when using the tag for a course called service learning. And so then finally, on our own campus, the aspiration, and you'll see at the bottom, this work is in progress at the campus level. And I'm guessing it's likely to be implemented no earlier than fall 2016. We're not in charge of this, but the goal would be to have questions at the end of a semester when a faculty member is registering grades, have a set of questions that would pop up and ask them to what extent, number one, is your community partner involved in course planning? This is the draft set of questions that Tom has put together at this point. These are not our final questions, but you can imagine then that if a faculty member was asked, and this is a census,
right,
and it's different than a survey.
Definitely, I was corrected on that. So
because
it's the whole population of courses that are tagged as an asset at our institution. So it's comprehensive across all faculty that are teaching a service learning course will be given this.
And it's for administrative tracking purposes. It's simply counting the number. So the faculty will not be reviewed on this. And as you can well imagine, all this needs to go through lots of hoops. But these would be our kind of sample questions. These would be the kind of questions that one could ask to get at any one of these variables in a research design.
And where we imagine that we have the faculty, of course, will be given the taxonomy when it's finalized. That will help inform their responses to these questions.
And their course design. So next slide tells you how to give feedback on the taxonomy. The Google Doc will be open, but then you can also, by all means, if you don't want to give feedback in that public forum, we welcome any emails that you want to give back to us on this. And then we also want to take this opportunity to invite you to consider attending the 8th annual IUPUI Service Learning Research Academy. And the next slide provides you some information on that Research Academy. We will be hosting that in collaboration with Indiana Campus Compact. So the first 2.5 days, people can come to participate in a Service Learning Institute, and that's around service learning course design. And then the last 2.5 days are a Research Academy that's really designed to work with individuals, although a number of campuses are beginning to send teams to this, and work on conducting research and scholarship related to service learning course design and community engagement.
Yeah, if you have any questions at all about that, feel free to send me an email. And I'll just add, it's an intense 2.5 days of the Research Academy, but you absolutely see the growth in attendees' research skills. And actually, personally, it's very satisfying when I'm at a conference and I see someone presenting on research that was conceptualized at the Research Academy. So that's happened a number of times, so we're very proud of that.
Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Julie and Tom. I want to, Tara, can you bring up the slide with the Google Doc one more time? I want to remind everyone that the Google Doc is going to be the best way to spend some time and provide feedback beyond this webinar. So please do take time and provide feedback in that regard. But I'm going to go through some of the questions that were listed in the chat box. And I'm just going to go in order at this point. But if we get more questions, we may need to combine them. The first question, Julie and Tom, had to do with one of the references, the Finley 2012 citation. If you could provide that citation or the title, I know it's Ashley Finley from AAC&U and a lot of the work that she's done. Could you actually provide a little more information because it was not on the reference page of your taxonomy handout?
I believe that was civic learning and democratic engagements. It's a review of the literature on civic engagement of secondary.
Well, that's 2011, I
That's
think. What slide is it on? Let's see. Oh. You know, I'm sorry, I can't right now.
Okay.
We will send that to Tara. You can give that to the person.
Thank you. We can follow up on that. We had a question here from our colleagues at Utah Campus Compact, and they said, you mentioned Tania Mitchell's work. Would you say that high intensity is informed by the conception of critical service learning?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And her work has been very helpful to our thinking. She's an author on our upcoming book, but then the recent publication that she just did, using a critical service learning approach to facilitate civic identity development, was very, very beneficial. But I'm also going to say, but I'm sure that there is even, you know, that is where we welcome feedback on that last column, because there's bound to be more dimensions of this lens on critical service learning that could be added to that last dimension. But by all means, she's very instrumental. And then also I'd say the white paper by John Saltmarsh, the Democratic White Paper by John Saltmarsh, Matt Hartley, and Patty Clayton was also very beneficial to our thinking.
Great. Let's move on to our colleagues Dorothy and Joyce said, what about courses that integrate or cross disciplines in service learning? That seems important to consider as well.
Funny you should mention that. I just submitted a proposal, some research that I did with our director of research, and it was the integration of service learning within the context of the team learning community. And the dependent variable there was integrative learning and the CMG metric. So yeah, it's very important. We haven't really addressed that in the taxonomy, but that is.
But we could by adding an S to the word discipline.
Right.
I mean, so it's either in the discipline or cross disciplines.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing that your question reminds me of is that with RISE in particular, we know that it's oftentimes there's lots of flavors of a service learning course. So it could be service learning and international study abroad. It could be service learning and undergraduate research. And so then how do these variations of service learning along with another teaching strategy, how do they change this taxonomy is another very good question.
Thank you. Another question from Jabari Bodrick. Would you consider low-intensity service learning courses to be bad?
I'll answer that. I'll say no. I do not consider them to be bad. I think I come at this work from a perspective of faculty and instructors enter service learning in a lot of different ways. And some faculty want to put their toe in the water. They are on our campus, they see the emphasis in this. We're, for example, having a United Way Day of Caring tomorrow. Faculty could have their students do a one-time service project there. What I've seen is that faculty over time become more committed to this teaching strategy and more committed to the importance of any one of these variables, reflection, working with a community partner, identifying community outcomes. So I think it's an entry point. I think it's a way in the door, and that ideally what our goal is to develop community engaged scholars across not only teaching but research and service. And so they may come in on this on that very low level. And then aspirationally, we want to continue to prod, support, provide resources, give examples of moving them up this continuum.
Thank you for explaining that. Lisa Tessier provided a comment in the chat box that I think begs a question. The comment is, great matrix. I look forward to seeing student-centric and community-centric versions. Have you given thought to those versions of this?
Well, you know, it's like, yes, but we haven't done it yet because this is our first one. But I think that you're absolutely right. And what I think is most exciting about this is a community partner matrix, because we provide a lot of aspiration toward how to support community members as co-educators, but I don't think we have really articulated that and provided a solid demonstration of what that means from a low to a high level. We can see, we can picture the difference. We know when we've got a great community partner, but to articulate that, and one of the variables that we had in this from the very start, but we finally had to take it out, was the work of, again, of Baisley, Littlepage, and Bennett. And what they found is that in service learning, community partners were able to differentiate between what a service learning student was and a regular volunteer. And then they go on in that to identify the ways that the volunteers added to capacity versus service learning students adding to capacity. We wanted to have that in, but we couldn't figure out a way to put that in if this in fact was a instructor-centric one. But that would be a kind of variable that would be of great value from a community partner perspective.
Well, I'll add there, with speaking about a potential taxonomy that's community-centric, I recently did interviews with community partners, and we asked a question during the interviews around how they see themselves as a co-educator. And the range of responses there was a real continuum that I think will really inform when we undertake that in the future. Very interesting.
Wonderful, thank you. Harold Keller also posed a question. Great taxonomy for course development and working with faculty and departments. From a research perspective, wouldn't there be value in articulating a range of variables that need to be described as part of any research and assessment of service learning?
Yes. it's
I think I'm going to have to hear it again.
Yeah.
The question again.
Absolutely. So from a research perspective, wouldn't there be a value in articulating a range of variables that need to be described as part of any research and assessment of service learning?
So when I hear the question, and they might be able to respond back, are you saying, therefore, this is the list of variables that one needs to take into consideration anytime you're doing research on a service learning course? Like a variable around reflection, variable around community partnership. So are you suggesting maybe we need an additional row there where we're actually listing out the variables? Because we just gave samples in our presentation.
And I'm just thinking that the range of variables we get at critical reflection, the amount is one way of looking at that. We do a study now where we're looking at how often is it continuous throughout the semester. I'm wondering if that's what he's getting at and articulating that.
Those are great points. And Harold, we would welcome your clarification or comments if you're still on the line in the chat box.
And actually, the question, though, is a very important question, because I want this to lead exactly to answering that question. So from our presentation, there's been a gap in understanding, and so any feedback or additional information would be very helpful, because that's the goal of this from a research perspective.
Great. There are not any other questions in the chat box at this time, and our time is growing short. So I do want to allow Tom and Julie, as our featured presenters, any concluding comments that you would like to share given some of the questions that you have had.
Just please go to the Google Doc, or feel free to email Julie or I. Our emails are on the first page of the PowerPoint. Any feedback you have, because what we found is that when we circulate this document, sometimes points will come out and are just fully fleshed out better. That really helps us get to where we want to go. So I would really encourage the attendees to do that.
Yes, and then I'll second the value that it has been for us to be asked to do this and the timeline that we've been on, because this really has moved our thinking forward, and I hope it's an excellent conference, and we look forward to learning more about your work.
Just in closing, because Harold did follow up in the chat box, thank you for doing that, Harold. The comment is, for each of the rows, it would seem helpful to describe the relevant variables that need to be described as part of research.
And one of the things I'll say to that, the relevant variables are always going to vary depending on your initial question. And so but I appreciate the question because it may be that there is a way that we can, we will for sure be addressing this in our introductory chapter because that's the purpose of including it in book 3. And it may be that as we work that out in that introductory chapter, we figure out a way to include that actually on the taxonomy itself. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you very much. In closing, I want to again thank Julie and Tom as our featured presenters for sharing their research and scholarship with us. And as Julie mentioned at the beginning, the draft form of this is really allowing for us as a community of scholars to participate with them in exploring these research questions and really utilizing the service learning taxonomy as a tool through this exploratory research and the webinar as the space for that. I do want to let all of you know that Tara Luparello is our wonderful administrative director for the association. She's been working behind the scenes on a number of different dimensions of our work, specifically behind the scenes of this webinar in both promotion, implementation, and she will also be the one to follow up. Her follow-up will include both the link to the Google Doc, as many of you have requested that, as well as the presentation, because our presenters have agreed to share that. But the Google Doc is a wonderful way for you to continue the dialogue with Tom and Julie. So we encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to continue the dialogue at the annual research conference of IRSlice, again, November 16th through the 18th, later this fall in Boston, hosted by our colleagues at Northeastern University. And I want to again thank all of you for participating. On behalf of the entire board of IRSlice, thank you for the wonderful work that you do in contributing to the field and fostering research in service learning and community engagement. And we look forward to future sessions. And Tara, if you could get on the line for us and mention to everyone when our next webinar will be.
Our next webinar, I believe, is October the 20th, but we will be sending an email out shortly with details on that. So be on the lookout. That'll come through our normal newsletter that we send.
Thank you again to everyone for joining us. We're going to end this webinar, but we encourage the dialogue to continue in the various formats that we've discussed, and we wish everyone a great day on behalf of IRSlice and the board. Take care, everyone.